Hello everybody, welcome to Introduction to the Visual Arts. Today I want to talk about how to watercolor. We're going to use watercolor for several of the projects, and the project that we're going to use, one of the projects that we're going to use for watercolor is the Romanticism project by Caspar David Friedrich, that landscape project. So I want to show you how to watercolor. But before I show you how to watercolor, I want to talk about paintbrushes. As you know, there are several kinds of paintbrushes. So the first kind of paintbrush I want to show you is this paintbrush here. If you look at it from straight on, you can see that the ferrule, or this metal part, is a round. So the paintbrush is called a round. It's just a round. And then they come in various sizes. If you have a paintbrush like this, where the ferrule, this metal part, is flat, the paintbrush is called a flat. Now, the difference is that when you use a flat, it usually is for a harder kind of paint, like perhaps oil paint or acrylics. Watercolor is a very soft paint, so you probably will use a round for it. Now, that isn't to say that these rules can't be broken, because rules always can be broken in art. In fact, rules are meant to be broken. So if somebody who's doing watercolor says you can't use a flat, you can say, but I want to use a flat because I want to do this and this and this. So then it's perfectly all right to use a flat if it works for you. There are lots of different kinds of paint, and we're going to work today with watercolor. You have tempera paint in your kit, and you also have a watercolor pad. Now, the only difference between tempera and watercolor is the binder. The binder is that which makes your paint liquid. So if you have watercolor, you know that you use water to make it liquid. If you have tempera, you have eggs that make it liquid. And that's why when tempera paint spoils, it smells like rotten eggs. If you have oil paint, you have some sort of oil that makes it liquid. So all paint is pigment, all paint stains, and all paint is simply different by what the binder, whatever makes it liquid. So that's the thing to know. Now, if you're going to use watercolor, and we're going to use watercolor for several projects, so I want to just give you an idea how to use watercolor. So you get your pan of watercolors, and you should have a paintbrush in your pan of watercolor. If you don't like that paintbrush, or if you want a different one, you can always buy another one, but there's only one provided in your kit. So the very first thing that you want to do is you want to soften your watercolors. So you want to put some water on them to soften them up. So you'll have to decide which colors you're going to use. So for our Romanticism project, our Caspar David Friedrich project of the vast landscape, we're going to do what I call is an accidental painting. Now, the secret with watercolor, there's a couple things that you need to know about watercolor. I use the get in and get out method. Watercolor is not very forgiving, so it doesn't like you to go over and over and over once you've painted something. So you almost have to figure out in your head what you're going to paint before you even begin. So I'm looking here at Caspar David Friedrich's The Monk by the Sea. And if I look at that, I'm seeing that we have a little tiny horizon line that's like not even 1/4 of the way up. Then we have these dark clouds. Then the sky gets light. Here it gets darker, and then it darkens up as it gets to the horizon. I can see that as I'm analyzing this painting. Right through the center, there's this very dark area, and then here the sand is light again. So I'm just going to kind of look at that, and maybe that's the kind of thing I want to paint. But it doesn't really matter. It's just that you want to think about, have something in mind before you start. Now, I would recommend that you don't use black at this point. I would not use black because it really gets dirty fast and it really gets dark fast. So I would stay away from the dark colors. I'd also paint the light colors first. That's just the way I would do it. You don't have to do it that way, but your water gets dirty really fast. And so if you go from light to dark, it's a little bit easier. Okay, so I want to make sure my brush is clean. So the way you do it is you dip it in water and you take your paper towel and just squeeze it. Don't pull, but just squeeze it between your thumb and your forefinger to get it nice and clean. So I'm just going to start with, say, some yellow paint. And I'm going to do just an accidental painting. And I know that I'm just going to let it happen. I don't really even know in my head right now what I'm going to do. I'm just painting, and I'm using this idea that I want to get in and get out, and I want to use a lot of water, and I want the paint to run together. I really want it to run together a lot. So very, very fast, I'm using lots of water, and a sheet of paper from your multimedia pack should work for this. And again, I'm not going to use too many colors, but I am using a technique that's called wet into wet. You can see how if you're painting with wet, if it's still wet, you can see how it runs together. And you can even do things like this to make it, to help it run even more, if you want to do that. So then I'm going to add some blue in here. I wouldn't use too many colors. I'd use a couple light colors and then maybe a couple dark colors, but I wouldn't do much more than that. If you want a little more pigment, if you want it a little darker, you just add a little more pigment and just keep going, but go as fast as you can. Get in and get out. Use lots and lots of water. And I'm going to add a little violet here, down here. And you want to try to cover the whole thing. Now, there is a technique if you want. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. I've just taken some table salt. And while this is still wet, I'm just going to put some table salt on here. And what happens then is it's going to give you it kind of runs in a certain way. And once it dries, you can knock that table salt off, and you can end up getting an interesting technique. Now, you might have to play with it a little bit, and I would recommend that you just play around with this. Just try to paint some colors, paint color into color, paint wet into wet, go as fast as you can, paint wet into wet, and once you have your whole sheet of multimedia piece of paper painted, then you'll need to stop. You'll need to stop there, and you'll need to let it dry for a few minutes. So I've got it covered, and so I'm just going to do it like this and just pull it down like this a little bit so that it runs. And you really want to keep your colors clean. You don't want to get them muddy. You don't want to overwork them. It really is all about getting in and getting out, and it's all about painting as fast as you can and making sure that it's just wet, wet, wet as can be, and then let it dry. And you can see right here, the salt is getting that little grainy look. So with that, we're going to stop, and I'm going to let my watercolor dry, and then I'm going to show you the second step just as soon as this is dry.